If I discover I'm out of compliance for a multi-state sales and use tax or multi-state income tax issue, should I pursue a voluntary compliance program? The answer to this question is maybe. And what drove me crazy a year back when Wayfair was a huge issue and when companies were scrambling to try and deal with this is everybody was talking about, let's enter into a voluntary disclosure program as quickly as possible. And the reality of those programs is they were a great deal from the states because they were raising revenue and collecting all sorts of taxes, but they were bad news for most businesses. Just because you do business in multiple states doesn't mean you have all this free cash flow to support paying a whole bunch of back tax liability. But a bunch of people panicked, a bunch of people registered for these voluntary compliance programs with the states in order to avoid penalties and maybe get a reduction of the interest rate. But to what effect? So the more practical concern is rather than whether I enter into a voluntary compliance program is what is my exposure and what's the appropriate way to deal with it. And the appropriate way to deal with it isn't necessarily doing what the state tells you to do. The responsible thing to do, and as a corporate officer or an owner, you have a responsibility to your organization. The responsible thing to do is to measure twice and cut once. Really take the time to understand what your exposure is from a legal perspective. Understand how the states operate in terms of their revenue enforcement. What's the likelihood you're going to get caught? What's the exposure if you get caught? You may have a small amount of nexus in Wyoming, and you may have to pay them like $1,000 if they catch you. Maybe it's best to let them come find you rather than filing a state income tax return and a state sales tax return in the state of Wyoming. So there's a variety of ways to approach this problem, but the issue is people who are rushing into solutions without seeking proper guidance. And so from a multi-state perspective, this area of law is very complicated. It involves multiple jurisdictions, and you really need somebody who can navigate through the landscape of these issues so that you avoid liability and that so you don't enter yourself into a situation that you can't dig yourself out from.